All right. Well, welcome. We're going to get started. If people join us, they'll just be let in as we go. Thanks for joining us. I want to thank Ms. Ali Rasul for inviting me to talk with you today. I'm Jim Wright, and I'll tell you a little bit about myself. But first of all, why are we here? We're here because the request was that I offer a workshop, just some tips to help with learning. So I got thinking that's great because everybody needs that. So that's what today is. It's really some classroom strategies, and there's a handout that you've received that has the materials I'm going to be talking about today. Um, what I'm going to be doing right now from my end is minimize my video, and I'll come back on in the video at the end if there's any questions. I just want to be able to focus on this PowerPoint. So the one point that I'll make is as I'm zipping through this workshop, sharing this content, if questions come up, go ahead and type it in that chat bar, or just hold them, and at the end of the session, we can certainly have a chat about those. You do have the handout that was sent to you, Take Control of Your Own Learning, Classroom Strategies That Really Work. It runs about 18, 19 pages. That's my little reminder to start recording if I've forgotten, so that's just a memory aid. A little bit about myself. I live and work in New York State, so I'm a different time zone from you. It's 5:06 here. I'm actually a school psychologist by training. Got my start working in the center of New York State, Syracuse, New York. It's about 3.5 hours drive north of New York City. So it's the rest of the state. I've also worked as an administrator in schools, and now I work privately training schools in what's called response to intervention, RTI. A lot of work I do actually is talking with teachers about ways to help kids to learn more effectively. So I was really pleased to be asked to talk with you as students directly about ideas for improving your school performance. We kind of take the teachers out of the mix, and I can just talk with you about those ideas. But let me share with you quickly what this workshop is going to include. I'm going to open by just highlighting what skills are important for classroom success. I call those pivot points because they make so much difference in terms of school success. We're then going to talk a little bit about how sometimes our thinking can either work against us or for us in helping us to be more successful in school. I then wanted to talk a little bit about what are called academic survival skills, think homework, study skills, test preparation, in ways to turn those into good routines so we'll be even more successful. And finally, when I think about middle school into high school, a big thing to work on is going to be reading comprehension, because the reading gets more difficult, and often it's depending on your subject area, it may not be that interesting, but we still have to find ways to really hang on to that information. So there's some tricks for doing that. So I was going to share those ideas with you as well. This conversation will last maybe half an hour, and then if there's questions, I'll certainly take those. Just to start off, we're going to look at those areas of success in school. I'm going to call those pivot points. What skills are important for classroom success? I'm sure when I list these for you, it's actually on page 2 of your handout. This will not surprise you, but I think having them all laid out here can help us to think about areas you might want to focus on. Once I go through those, you don't have to necessarily share, but I want you to think about which one of these might be your target to really work on for this year. So we'll go through those real quickly. What are those areas of strength that really help us to be really essentially college ready? So basic academic skills. The question I would have is, do I have those basic skills, for example, to be able to complete classwork? If that's in place, that's great. That's the first building block. The next question is going to be, if I'm a student, do I have those necessary, what are sometimes called academic survival skills? That's not so much what you know in terms of book knowledge, but what you have a good homework, work regimen, time management, are you organized, those kinds of things, because those really impact our learning as well. In fact, I worked with some middle and high school teachers who told me in their schools, their number one concern is the kids don't have those academic survival skills. They don't have a good study regimen. They kind of struggle with homework. They're disorganized. So that's an area a lot of students really need to look at. Work completion. If I'm a student, am I able to get the work done and turn it in on time? Transitions. Can I move flexibly between different activities in the same classroom? Can I move quickly into different expectations across classrooms? Am I able to transition? And again, most students can do that, but for some that's an area of need. Attentional focus, am I able to focus attention on the work? Whether I'm in large group, small group, I don't get distracted. Do I have emotional control? Am I managing my emotions across settings, responding appropriately to setbacks and frustrations? Let's face it, that's what school's about. So can I handle that, the ups and downs? Peer interactions, am I able to work productively and have good social interactions with other students in my school? These last three kind of add on to each other. Each one builds on the one before. This next one is going to be a part of our conversation today. Some people call it self-efficacy. So efficacy, the ability to feel that you're strong and confident, and so the student possesses that positive view of their academic abilities, believing that increased effort paired with effective work practices are going to result in improved outcomes. The term we're going to use for that in a moment is actually growth mindset, which is it may be a term that you've heard. Self-understanding, the student can put into words their relative patterns of strength and weakness in academic skills, their general behavior and social emotional functioning. Really, this just means you know yourself and you're able to say, look, I'm somebody who I get anxious about this, but I can really handle this. It's good to know that. And then finally, can you self-advocate? Can you advocate for your needs, and can you negotiate effectively with adults? So all of these are important skills. If somebody has, and I'll jump back to all those skills in place, the truth is you are, in my experience, you're college ready. You're ready to go. So something I would ask you to think about, we won't do this Zoom poll because there's not enough of you to really need that, but just remember that page 2 has this list of competencies. And a question for you would be, which one of these 10 areas would you kind of target and say, you know what, for this year or maybe into next year, that would be my target. Whether that's self-efficacy, self-understanding, academic survival skills. So pick a target. All of these are important, but you know yourself best which one to really focus on. That said, we're now going to talk a little bit about ways to think about school and success. That's where we're going to go next. And we're going to talk about some research that you may have heard about. Schools are really interested in this right now. It's called growth mindset. What mindset helps students to be successful? And this actually points to something, I was asked to talk about how people can, learn better. And one of the biggest roadblocks to learning better actually turns out to be our own thinking, and sometimes traps in the way that we think, faulty ways that we think. So let's look at that. There's a famous psychologist out there doing research. Her name is Dr. Carol Dweck, and she's a big name in what's called growth mindset research. She's a cognitive psychologist. And and of course she works with others who've published on this, but what she's found in her research is that as learners, our performance as learners, so your performance in school, my performance as a learner, really is profoundly influenced by, first of all, what we believe about intelligence and abilities, what we believe about ourselves. If we think in a positive way about our intelligence and abilities, it's very likely we're going to be successful as learners. If we have faulty thinking, it'll really interfere with our learning. And another point to keep in mind is that every one of us is like a self-coach. We're constantly reinforcing our current beliefs. The question is, are we feeding ourselves good messages, or are we feeding ourselves negative messages that really hurt? So there's two kinds of ways of thinking we're going to contrast: fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So fixed mindset, as we'll see in a moment, is not a good thing. Growth mindset is a good thing. But the truth is, we can foster good thinking habits as long as we pay attention. So that's where we're going to go next. So beliefs about mindsets, about the way that we think about ourselves and our abilities. That's what we're looking at right now. And I'm going to tell you, I love the content I'm about to share with you after this. But if there's one part of the workshop, I'd say this is the most important section. It'd be right here. So I have a daughter. She's 14 years old. She's in school. She's a great student. An issue she has, though, is if she does poorly on a test, she assumes it means that she doesn't have ability, she's not cut out to do mathematics or whatever, and that's completely wrong. The truth is that she has the ability, and she needs to maybe talk with the teacher about a better process and put the time in, but she's going to be fine. So we have to be challenging some of that negative self-thinking, and that's what we're going to be doing here. Somebody who has a fixed mindset, by the way. So this is the notion that our abilities are limited. Is somebody who thinks that. They thinks that their intelligence, their general ability level is fixed. They would believe that putting extra effort into something plays a very minor role. It won't make a difference. So if I have a setback in my classroom and I'm a fixed mindset student, I think, oh, I can't do this. I don't have the ability. I wasn't made to do math or writing. And it results in the students giving up or withdrawing their efforts. Like, I can't do this. I'm going to stop. That's a very common pattern, and it's completely faulty in thinking. Growth mindset, and you guys knew this was coming, is somebody who thinks that intelligence and other attributes of ability are malleable, which is a word that just means what? It just means that we can change them, we can improve them if we try. They're changeable with effort. So this perspective views struggle as a positive. It's an opportunity for growth. So I didn't do as well in that test as I wanted to. That tells me I need to put more energy into it and maybe follow a process, check in with the teacher for help. But if I do that, I'm going to be fine. So it's an opportunity for growth, not a sign that I'm incapable of learning. So we want to focus on that, obviously, the growth mindset. That said, when somebody who is a fixed mindset kind of person runs into a roadblock, wow, I didn't do well in that assignment. Oh, I failed that test. There's a tendency to get frustrated and give up, withdraw effort, disidentify, which is an interesting word, with the challenge subject. I don't care. I don't like math anyway. Also, possibly to even be at greater risk of cutting a corner or cheating. Not that we are saying that people are doing that, but let's face it, if I think, wow, the only way I can do well here, because I don't have the ability, I have to find other ways. So we might be more likely to try to cut a corner here and there. So if the same person, because here's the thing, a person can change their thinking. If a person is a growth mindset person, sure, they had a setback. I didn't do as well in that assignment as I hoped. They may view that setback as an opportunity for learning. They realize they need to put more effort in. And they also have to think about, okay, what is it I'm doing in my study process, my work process that needs to get better? And maybe they can fix it on their own or they talk with their teacher, but they can figure that out. That growth mindset tells you, you know what, we can fix this. So there's optimism there. And that, by the way, is the most truthful way of looking at the problem. Anybody can do better with efforts. One question that comes up is, yeah, does it make a difference? Let's say I'm a fixed mindset person in my school. Is that going to hurt my performance academically? Turns out if the work is within my typical ability level, it won't make a difference. I'm still going to do fine. But when I hit a roadblock or a setback, the fixed mindset student is more likely to go into a tailspin, fall behind, get frustrated, and give up. Whereas the growth mindset student says, well, I had a setback and there's a little struggle here, but I'm going to put the effort in. I'm going to put the effort in and I'm going to be fine, right? So here's the last piece on growth mindset. It turns out the self-coaching statements, let's face it, we all kind of coach ourselves. The messages we give ourselves, you can structure those messages in a way that will make you more optimistic and make you more effective. And there's actually books on this and there's courses on this. I'm going to give it to you in one slide. So you are your own best coach. And if you have a difficult task ahead of you, think about framing your thoughts to include 3 parts. And remember, I'm recording this workshop, so you'll be able to reference this again. The first thing we do is that we acknowledge that the difficult work coming up is really going to be difficult. We're honest and we recognize the difficulty of the task, but we don't exaggerate it. We don't go on and on about it. So for example, this math test, next week covers a huge amount of material. Okay, the acknowledgement is it's going to be a lot. All right. But we also didn't go on and say, oh my gosh, I can never do it. So we're not doing the negative. So that's the acknowledging of the challenge of the work. By the way, as Dr. Carol Dweck pointed out, of course this academic work is challenging. If it weren't challenging, why would you be in school? I mean, school, that's the whole point of school. Then we ask ourselves, okay, but what process should I follow to be successful on this big task coming up? So we specify the process. So for example, math test, I'll use my teacher's study guide and study at least an hour each night to prepare. Great. And then we end this with reassuring ourselves, a statement of confidence. You know what? I'm likely to be successful on this task so long as I follow the process and put in the necessary effort. So let's finish that up. If I follow this plan, I should do fine on the test. So it's just laid out there. Yeah, it's a challenge, but here's what I'm going to do about it and the effort I'm going to put in. And if I do that, I'm going to be fine. This is a way to not only reassure yourself, but you're doing it realistically because you have a plan. And that plan is going to get you through. So if I tend to fall into negative thinking, oh, I can't do this, I'm stupid, and all the rest of it, um, I have to stop and go, no, I got this. Yeah, it's a challenging assignment, but here's what I'm going to do, and if I do that, I'm going to be fine. And that self-coaching is very, very important, and that's growth mindset. So if you have questions or thoughts about that during our Q&A, we can certainly take those questions. Very, very powerful. This is a small part of our workshop, but it's in many ways the most important. That said, the next thing I want to talk about is what are sometimes called academic survival skills. By middle school, high school, the students are expected to be self-managing and to take on a lot of routines, right? So I'm a big fan of checklists that boil down the essential elements of those routines: organization, study skills, test preparation, independent work habits, and turn that into a checklist, because then I can remember always to do the right things and the most important things. So we're going to look at that. When we talked about pivot points, the number 2 pivot point I shared with you were academic survival skills. And a lot of teachers in middle and high school express frustration because their students don't really have good study skills, organization skills. But you know what? I can't blame students because here's one of the questions I often ask my teachers in my teacher workshops, and I do a lot of them. I ask teachers to tell me in their whole school career, from kindergarten to graduate school, at what point in their lives do they feel like they really developed good study skills? And occasionally a teacher says middle school or high school, but the great majority of teachers say to me, college. Some say graduate school. And so it's like, wow, which means that the norm is for kids to get through the entire range of elementary, middle, high school, and no one's ever really done a good tutorial in what good, strong study skills look like. So I'm hoping today what I share with you is going to help to kind of counter that. If you guys can get to college having some pretty strong self-management, academic survival skills, study skills, test prep, etc., you're going to have a huge advantage over a lot of other students who get there and they do not have those routines. Those routines will save you for sure. So let's talk about that whole notion of a checklist. I just gave you one example because it's important. Study skills, right? That's the basis of a lot of our learning. Gave you a sample checklist. You might have a somewhat different routine that you use, but I just want to hit some of these highlights. And you're very welcome to take this checklist, borrow it, use it as a jumping off point, take some of those elements and make your own checklist, add a couple of bullet points you don't see here, that's okay. But just some of the highlights. When I talk with someone about, people about having a strong, study skill kind of routine, I start by saying, do you have a study schedule? It's like, well, why do you need it? At night, you just go home and you can study. Yeah, but if you set aside time for that and you stick to that schedule, you're more likely to do the studying and not run out of time. Are you avoiding distractions, right? Distractors are sometimes called. Because I thought sometimes I'm talking with a student and she says to me, well, yeah, I mean, I'm sitting there, I'm working, but then they have their pet in their room and they've got their cell phone and they've got, and those distractions, we really don't do a good job multitasking. If the cell phone or the pet runs by, it pulls our attention away. Guess what? We're not doing homework. We're lost. Create an organized study space. Set clear study goals. This is an important one. You might go home with 2 or 3 demanding assignments, and so you might want to say, okay, how much do I have to do for each? And then I want to make a study agenda. Multiple subjects in one session. Maybe I should take the most difficult work and put it first. And so I've got some time set aside. I've got goals that I'm studying toward. I have a little agenda to work on. And I've been smart because let's face it, end of the day, we get kind of tired. My energy is never going to be higher than when I start. So I'm going to take the tough work and do it first. You might want to break it up a little bit. Sometimes, I'm studying for a test. I'm going to study for 2 hours straight. That can get a little tedious. So you might break it up and do a little of another assignment, then come back just to kind of keep your self-energized. If you have a big study task, chunk it, break it into smaller units. And in those little chunks, done it, kind of set it aside. Maybe take a short break between each, just so you don't overwhelm yourself. A couple more, and again, these might work for you, these may not, but the research is pretty clear, and I've done this for myself as well. If you have really challenging content, you might want to think, this is pretend, of course, because you're studying alone, but you might want to take a difficult concept, and you might want to think, okay, do I have this yet? Let me ask myself. And so you might, pretend that you're teaching the concept to another student. If I were explaining this to a student, how would I explain it? And as you try to teach it, often it either makes it clearer or it shows you, wow, I really don't understand it. I have to go back and study it a little bit more. You might want to highlight questions when you're looking at your notes or completing course readings using highlighters, little margin notes, sticky notes, or other ways to record your questions so that you can take those into the teacher and not lose those. Seek help when needed. It's great that you guys can figure a lot of this out on your own, but if you've put in half an hour at home and it's like, wow, I'm not understanding this, just make a note of it as a question, take it into your teacher. And finally, avoid cram sessions, which of course means that the test is tomorrow. I put off studying till to pull something like an all-nighter. That tends not to be effective because our brains get tired, so we're not absorbing the information. And the truth is, we don't want to show up for a test when we need to be alert and on our best game, and then come in, exhausted. So avoid cram sessions as well. So quick takeaway, we talk about something as simple as study skills, but it's not simple. And there's really good strategies that work. So if you create that checklist and we start to follow the checklist, we make our own routines, we tend to be a whole lot more organized and consistent. So enough about that. I love the idea of checklists for organization skills, for managing your time, just like the one you see here. One other point, and I'm just going to go through this real quickly. I do have a handout as well on managing test anxiety. It's pretty extensive. It gives you some additional ideas for study habits. It talks about preparing for tests, and then it talks about efficient ways to take a test. So if you're interested, good tips there as well. The only thing I was going to share with you, though, for test taking are two sample ideas that I felt are especially worth looking at. And here they are. One is this term comes from the tech industry, performing a brain dump. Sometimes you come into a testing situation and you've had to memorize a lot of content. So long as your teacher approves it, if you are handed a test and there's like a blank sheet on the back, the last page is blank on the back or whatever, or you have some scrap paper, before you start the test, you might want to take some of that key information that you were juggling in your brain trying to remember, and just jot it down right on that the test itself, the back of the test, if that's allowed, or on some scrap paper. Again, so long as your teacher is okay with that. And you're doing this because you want to allow yourself to fully think about the content during the test, and you don't want to have to keep fighting to remember this content. So taking some of that content that you memorized and just jotting it down as notes can be a great way to reduce the thinking load and to reduce anxiety. So I think that's useful. The other point I discovered for a lot of students is when we're doing essay questions, sometimes we read the question and we think we know what the teacher's asking for and we just start writing, but we've missed something. So reading that essay question and underlying important terms that appear in that test question before we start, words like compare, contrast, discuss, summarize, can remind us, oh, okay, these are some things I have to make sure I include in my essay. So don't be too quick to read the essay question and just dive in. Take a moment, underline key terms, and just think about that. Anyway, lots more ideas there as well. The whole point of today is to give you more than I can possibly talk about, so you can go back and use it for sure. So we've talked about pivot points. What does it take to be successful in a middle and high school classroom when we prepare for college? We looked at those 10 items. We looked at growth mindset, productive ways to think about ourselves and our abilities that make us essentially more optimistic and more successful. We looked at checklisting those support skills, academic survival skills, like homework, a regimen, like time management, etc., even test prep. The one piece I wanted to end on here, though, is looking at ways to better comprehend what we're reading. You guys are already experiencing middle school, high school, moving into more abstract and challenging texts, and it's only going to be more challenging as you get into college. Doesn't mean you can't handle it, you absolutely can, but you may want to use some strategies to help you with that. Some of the strategies I'm showing you, I use all the time. So, and they're really lifelong skills. And pages 9 through 17 in your handout have all of these ideas explained, so you've got those. So think about yourself. Every day you're reading challenging material from assigned by your teacher, social studies, science, English, or whatever. So you want to be able to track, as you're reading those challenging assignments, there's three things you're trying to do. First of all, you're trying to keep track in real time. Are you understanding what you're reading? And if you're not, it's like, whoa, let me go back and review that. Again, reread it. You're also trying to find and make note of the most important information. So it's like, it's everything on that page is not equally important. A few elements really jump out. It's like, wow, I better pay attention to this. And finally, you want to find a way to hang on to recall that key information after you're done reading. So that's all pretty important. And we do this in real time, right? So that said, we have several interventions I want to share with you. Reading, reflection, pause, read actively, read, ask, paraphrase, linking pronouns to reference, mark it, jot it, and double entry reading journal. No requirement here, but if any of these ideas jump out at you, you might want to start using them during your independent reading. There's a couple here I'll share with you that I use. So the first is reading, reflection, pause. This is where I'm zipping along and I'm reading, and I realize, wow, sometimes I read a page and a half, and then I stop and I go, I don't know what I just read. So what I want to do is to start getting myself in the habit of maybe stopping periodically and asking, did I understand the gist of what I read? And if I didn't, then go back and look at that again. So a good way to do that is to build in some little pauses, some little breaks. They're called reading, reflection, pause. First thing I do is I say to myself, I'm going to set up a reading interval. You might make it time-based. Every 2 minutes with my smartphone, I'll time it when I'm reading, independently. Or it could be in the text itself. At the end of each paragraph, I'm going to pause and reflect. So it could be time-based, it could be text-based. Either way, at the end of each interval, my 2 minutes is up, or I'm at the end of the paragraph. You just take a moment to stop, to pause, to briefly, to think about what you just read in that little interval. And if you're thinking, yeah, I got it. Yeah, it's clear. But if you go, whoa, I think my mind wandered, or this is complicated, I can't recall what I just read, then go back and do a quick scan, a quick reread. So there's two things here. One is that there is a monitoring interval, like stop, pay attention, okay? And then there's a quick fix-up strategy. Oh, I didn't get that. Go back and reread. Simple. But if I'm using that strategy, I'm much more likely to recall the essential part of what I just read. Here's another simple tip. This is called read actively. And by the way, these are called research-based interventions. And all that means is that people researched these and found, wow, they really do help kids in a substantial way remember more of what they've read, simple as they are. So with read actively, I'm sitting with my book in front of me, and I'm reading a paragraph at a time. And while I'm reading the paragraph closely and carefully, I note the topic, the important details and facts. All right, so that's great. But then I take an index card and I cover that paragraph right then. And from memory, I try to recall the key details I just read. Okay, yeah, this, and this. Then I uncover the paragraph and I read it, I skim it again just to see how much of the information I just recited to myself that I was able to recall. So it's like, okay, try to get the key details, then cover, pardon me, and then try to recall verbally the essential information, then uncover, and make sure that double check to make sure that I had actually recalled the key details. It's simple, it's informal, it's like you're on the honor system, you just do it on your own. But if you do it, much more likely to retain the essential information from a text. I don't use this myself on everything I read. Sometimes I'm reading news articles and things that are pretty easy to grasp. But when I'm reading advanced text, and it really is a slog and it's kind of challenging, this is a good exercise because it keeps me on my toes and it really forces me to read for understanding, but also to read for detail. So there's another intervention, and if you look in your packet, you have this little organizer, this little form, if you ever print it out or want to, create your own worksheet like it. This is called Read, Ask, Paraphrase, and this is where I'm going to summarize what I'm reading. It's that important. So again, I'm going to make a point. I would never use this strategy I'm about to describe on any simple casual reading. But there are going to be some very high stakes, very important readings that I'm given. And I'm going to be saying to myself, there's a lot of coursework tied to this. I'm going to say, I'm going to read this carefully. In that case, I'm going to use what's called read, ask, paraphrase, RAP, RAP. And this is an intervention where I'm reading independently. Let's say it's informational text, maybe it's science, maybe it's social studies. And so for each paragraph, I'm going to first read the paragraph very closely. And then I'm going to, before I move on, ask myself, what is that main idea in this paragraph? What's the gist? And what are at least two supporting details? Great, super. Finally, I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to put into my own words what this paragraph just said. What's the main idea? And what are a couple of supporting details? And you know what? I'm going to force myself, this is good, to write it down in this little paragraph box. And in doing that quick summary, I'm much more likely to remember the gist, the main idea of what I just read. So that is the activity. Read, ask, paraphrase. And we do that paragraph by paragraph until we're done. And then if you chose, you could certainly share this with a teacher, and she or he would see that you have the reading you just did really well summarized. It also, by the way, as you do more of this summarization, tends to help writing as well. Your writing skills will come along. So sometimes we're reading, and what happens is, this has certainly happened to me, we're reading abstract text, advanced text. Abstract means, for example, I'm reading my social studies text and it talks about the US Constitution. Well, that's a thing. It's it's basically a charter of, rights and expectations in the way that the elements of our government interlink. But it's not concrete. You can't go over, and climb on top of the Constitution. It's not a thing. So as writers are writing about these abstract nouns out there, for the purposes of style, that they'll use pronouns to refer back to them. I'll blow this up to show you. What we want to do if we're struggling with some of this abstract text is, and we do something that's called linking pronouns to reference. A pronoun, of course, stands in the place of a noun. A referent is what is the noun the pronoun is pointing back to. So when you're using linking pronouns to reference, this is just something you do on your own, often with like a photocopy, a printout of an article. As you're reading the article for the first time, you're reading the passage, each time you come to a pronoun, you circle it. And then you track down, okay, take a moment, what the noun is that it links back to. In this case, the word is relationship. And you type or you write that noun in right next to the circled pronoun. And you're doing this because then you can do another read of the same article, only now each time you come to that circled pronoun, you force yourself to substitute that concrete noun, and it often helps us to better understand the passage we just read. Instead of just skipping over the pronouns, not sure what it refers to, it forces us to stop and really ground and link those pronouns back to the nouns. So simple as it looks, as a little notation approach, this can really help, especially when it's difficult to follow text. Mark it, jot it is a strategy. You probably have your own approach, but often what we find is readers that if we do what's called annotation, if you mark up text with your reactions to what you're reading, it's almost like you're having a conversation with the author. You as a reader tend to be more engaged, and you tend to get more out of the content. You tend to recall more of it. By the way, there's a great website, tweentribune.com, that is sponsored by the Smithsonian Institution, in Washington. And they had a funny article about, would you eat soup made from crickets, which actually sounds like a good thing in some ways if you read the article. I'm showing you what this looks like. With mark it, jot it, as you're reading and you come to an area that you're like, in a section of the text, you're like, what? So a sudden question comes to mind. You don't want to lose that thought. So you put a little question mark in there and keep reading. You're going to come to some areas that you're like, I do not know what that word means. So you might circle it. So that's a notation that means, I need to look up this word. And then whether you use underlining or an exclamation point, or you can use them interchangeably, that means, wow, this is important. Okay, great. So that's your markup. Question mark for questions, circle terms for, when you need to define a term, and use underlining or an exclamation point if you want to draw attention to important points. And then you return after you've done that first read, and you'll use annotation, you use comments that you'll write in to extend and explain those notations. So you find your question mark and you actually write down the question that came to mind. And this one is how many people in the world eat insects? So that the reader wondered that, having read the beginning of this article. If you have circled words, you're now going to look up the definition and write it in. If you have highlighted, section, underlined, or exclamation point because you think it's important, why is it important? And this person says, it just really seems weird to have insects in a fancy meal, so that's why it popped out at them. So this is a simple way to write up and annotate your ideas and your thoughts and your interactions with and reactions to the author. It's called Mark It, Jot It. Do this, and you're, again, more likely to retain what you've read. We have one last strategy for you. It's called the double entry reading journal. You see a little sample page here. You have a copy of this page in your handout. So if you ever want to do this, you have a page you can just print out and start using for this. With double entry reading journal, you would take your challenging reading and you fill out the top of this little reading journal page, name, date, what article that you're referencing. And here's the deal. Again, we want to really engage in the text and really grapple with it, because, and particularly the challenging section. So what you're going to do, and you can set your own goal. You might say, I'm going to do 5 passages this time, or 3 passages for my reading. And when you set a goal like that and you're reading along, when you come to a passage in your reading that feels like, wow, this is either significant or challenging, you copy the passage right in, verbatim, right into your journal. Great. So I'll just read this to you, even though you can too. It's not clear if serving insects is legal in all Western countries. Proper hygiene needs to be ensured at insect farms. Wow, okay, that gets my attention. So that's the direct quote from the article. And you can keep putting those down there. But what the reader then does is reflects on their thoughts about that passage. And this writer says, I would not want to eat insects if they're not safe as food, of course. And so you go on and you can be having this dialogue. And if you look at this sheet that I include in your handout, sometimes you're like, I don't know what to say about it. How do you get started? So we give you some sentence starters that could help you with your reflection, your thoughts about the passage. This reminds me of, this makes me think of, this is important because of, what confuses me about this is. So it just gives you some ways to kind of jumpstart your thinking a little bit as well. But again, it's all about a dialogue. Pick out relevant passages, write them down, and then reflect on them, and keep that journal. A, it's going to help you to engage in the passage, and B, you can refer back to it. So some of the ideas you record might be useful in the future. All right. So that was a very fast move through our content today. Again, we looked at those pivot points. We looked at the growth mindset. We looked at those checklists for survival skills. We looked here at those ways to attack reading comprehension skills, that kind of thing. I will open my video here. So as we were going through this, did any questions come to mind that you wanted to share? Any questions that came up? And maybe there's one in the chat, because I think one of you may have written it in, so bear with me while I pull that up. And bear with me, is my Zoom controls are sometimes unreliable. They seem to work okay. One of you pointed out when we were going through the pivot points was attentional focus. So some days that's me too. I tend to look at self-efficacy because I always have to be reminding myself that even to challenging tasks, that I have the ability to take them on and be successful. It's that growth mindset that we sometimes fight to make sure that we're always keeping ourselves practical and focused and optimistic. Only 3 of you, so no pressure, but any questions that came up, either about using any of the materials that I gave you today, the ideas, the resources, or other questions about learning that you wanted to bring up? Give you just a minute to think about that. Don't have to have questions, but if you did want to make sure you had that opportunity. Any questions? And as you're thinking about it, I'll be sharing a copy of this workshop with Ms. Ali Rasul and Ms. Subas, so that you should be able to access it. It'll be streamable. I'm just going to the chat again. One of you was asking the question about how we stay consistent with a study schedule. I would actually start by being modest. Sometimes we become a little overambitious. Yeah, and I'm going to have a 3-hour block every day, and I'm just going to bang away at the study books. You know, I might start with a good solid half hour to an hour that is like I'm always going to be doing that, and see how that goes, because that becomes more manageable. And within that study schedule, I'm going to start having a routine. Okay, get your materials set up, create that agenda. What we know about habits is that it takes sometimes a month to 6 weeks of steady application to a routine for it to start to feel like, oh, this is me, this is natural. So I would say, as you're trying to be consistent with adopting a study schedule, in particular, look out the first 6 weeks and ask yourself, how am I going to make myself have the staying power to do this? Because after that, it starts to become habit forming. That's how good habits happen. So yeah, great question. How do we stay consistent also with it, with the organization, plan? All of those things need consistency. Any other questions?
I had one question.
Yeah.
So if you talked about two different mindsets, it was like the fixed mindset and the growth mindset.
Yes.
So when you were describing both of them, I realized that I have I have a few attributes of like the fixed mindset and a few of like the growth mindset. So how would I like completely shift over to the growth mindset?
I like the way you frame that. I lay them out as being either or, and the truth is it's not either or, it's a mix. What research shows, by the way, is that the same person can have a fixed mindset in one domain and a growth mindset in another. So somebody who feels very comfortable in the arts is in studio art and they just own it. But in mathematics class, they're feeling like I can't do this.
Yeah, it's kind of like in a few subjects I'm more confident, and then in a few
Right.
others I'm not.
I think because I think you know full well which subject you're not confident in. I think that's the area where you start to challenge your thinking. So for me, I've always done well enough in mathematics, but when I was going through school like you, I never felt confident about it. So if I had this research then, what I would be doing is I'd be saying, stop. This is faulty thinking. It's challenging work, yes, but that's the whole point of school. Otherwise, why are we here? If I follow the guidelines the teacher gave me and use the help sessions that she offers, I can figure this out. And I need to put in time every day. And if I do that, I'm going to get through this. And I can start to, just because I literally can tell myself, I see what I'm doing. Here's a model to challenge that thinking. And I'd start to try to just stop and substitute those growth mindset statements. Initially, it feels awkward, like mechanical. But if you start to go, no, this is true, that this becomes, self-fulfilling. You're feeding yourself positive coaching statements, and that's how I'd approach it for sure.
Okay.
Yep. Other
Thank you.
questions? Any other questions?
Um, so how do you prevent like your brain going blank on a test? Like panicking and then your brain goes blank, like even if you studied for it.
I don't know exactly, but I'll tell you this. One of the reasons why my brain would sometimes go blank is I was trying to carry too much in it. So the idea I gave you of getting into the test and before things start, sometimes we feel the time pressure, so we just start. But if you could take a moment and take some of the key material that you're keeping in your head that's blocking some of your thinking, just jot it down, literally as a reference, so you can just put it aside and not worry about it. Sometimes that actually will reduce the pressure on your brain and will give you more, maybe a little bit more, because sometimes when we go blank, it's partly because of anxiety. There's just so much going on here. So think about that brain dump idea, possibly. And maybe you already do this, but going through the test itself before we dive in and start doing it, to look at the sections and think how we're going to allocate our time so we don't feel at the end, wow, I have so much to finish and so little time. And then we get anxious, and anxious can start to interfere with our thinking. Yeah.
I had a question.
Yeah.
How do you stay like motivated like every day to study and like positive throughout your sessions?
I don't have an easy answer for that. The answer really comes from you. So sometimes it's short-term goals. Okay, the deal is I'm going to study and I'm going to give it, a solid hour. And after that, here's something I'm going to do that's going to be a reward. So literally, I will set myself up for that, and I'll have a reward at the end. Sometimes it's that we have to remind ourselves what we're working toward, whether it is this year or in the future, to say I'm on track for this goal. It may be a goal that for something you want to do as a career. Sometimes we try to find something that interests us in the subject, so it's something that we will actually want to read or work towards. So, yeah, not an easy answer, but you have to think about different possible motivators, whether they're motivators you can give yourself after you do the work, whether they're activities that you take as being the focus of your work, or whether it's the long-term goal if you do well in your work. Yeah. That's an age-old question in middle and high school, and it's still there at college. Like, okay, this course I have to take it for my major. I don't love it. How do I get motivation to do it? You won't want to hear this, but the power of habit I talked about earlier, it's just habit. We fall into it. When we have habit, we don't always have to convince ourselves. It's like, here's my 1 hour of study. What am I going to study tonight? Which replaces, how do I get myself psyched up to study? Right? Habit helps to motivate. Not the cheeriest thing to hear, but it's true. Any other questions? You guys are asking great questions, by the way. Thanks for that. Any other questions?
I have another question. It kind of piggybacks off of Aisha's question earlier.
Mhm.
So what if like you feel stressed during a test, but it's not because you're just stressed in general? Like it's not like writing stuff down might not help as much. What do you think you would do in that situation?
A couple things. There's actually, I'm going to share a little research with you, and you might be able to use this. I don't know. In one study, there were some students who got really stressed before a math test, and so what they were encouraged to do is to take a moment just before the test and jot down their thoughts about how they're feeling right now. So how am I feeling right now? And they would say, as you understand, I'm feeling really stressed, I'm anxious, I'm worried I'm going to fail the test. Now, they didn't turn this in. They just wrote it down just to get it on paper. They didn't share it. But what was discovered was that just going through that little purging activity, that their level of anxiety dropped very noticeably during the testing. So literally just acknowledge it, voice it, get it sort of out of you, and often you'll get into the test feeling calmer. In part because, and this is true for me too, when we get stressed, we exaggerate. And then I'm going to fail the test. I'm going to fail the course. I'm going to fail school. I will never get into a college anywhere. Then you stop and go, reality check. I think you've gone overboard just a bit. You'll get through this. You might not do as well as you wanted to, and so our anxiety level drops. So maybe that, I call it the anxiety essay, jotting a few notes to yourself that describe the feeling to kind of get it out of your system, so to speak, just before the test. There's other things we do as well, deep breathing, relaxation exercises. Certainly being prepared for the test, for me, is the most reliable way to handle anxiety, to really feel like I studied enough, I'm not rushed. So those are some ideas, yeah. You guys are all good students. I can just tell by the kind of questions you're asking me. Any other questions that you have?
Yeah, I have one more question.
Yeah.
What times would you recommend to designate your studying to? So like after school, before school?
You know what? You know your own rhythms. If it were me, before school actually works best. Other people do better after school. Sometimes just the way schedules work, you got to go with the time that you have. One of the ideas in the test preparation handout I give you is to find pockets of time during the day that are open and using those for studying, because we often have a lot of bits of time here and there. If there are ways that we can put those into studying, you can get a lot of studying done before you even get home in the evening. But watch your own rhythms to try to get a sense of, are you a morning person? Are you an evening person? I'll say this though, because I can avoid things as well as anybody. I tend to try to first tackle the subject area that I'm not wanting to do. And once I do that, everything else becomes easy. If we keep putting off the thing we don't want to do, guess what? And you know this, it doesn't get done. So just some of those simple, scheduling, tricks that we use, because we know ourselves, right? We're coaching ourselves. If I don't make myself do this first, I'm going to get out of it. So definitely take on the most challenging thing first. Any other questions or comments?
I have another one.
Sure.
I know that this might not have like a concrete answer, but how long do you think it would take to implement all of these like growth mindset like points and then make them into a habit?
First of all, you may already have great habits, so it isn't like you have to take it all on. If I were picking and choosing, I would take the growth mindset first and try to make that habitual, because that's gonna help you with everything. All of a sudden, it's like I'm no longer my worst enemy, putting myself down, feeling lack of confidence, because I'm saying nope. There's a way to address this that's positive. So I would start with that. You can certainly look at your different routines, and you know as well as anyone which ones might need some strengthening. But it's not like everything in this workshop is new and you have to kind of take it all on. A lot of this is probably already in your repertoire. The thinking, the growth mindset piece would probably be the one I'd be recommending that you really take away from today and go back and apply, because it can pay some huge dividends. Really. Yeah. Other questions? Comments?
About the study schedule, so is it recommended that you set aside time for every day, or like, is it okay to do it some days of the week and not like some days you might be busier, so you might not schedule studying for that day?
You know what? Everyone's going to be different on that. I think for most students, for example, whether it's math or science, if they're staying with the studying, they're attending class, getting the notes, reviewing the notes several times a week, they're staying ahead of the material, I think they're going to be okay. If you're in a particularly demanding course, like, wow, I'm not getting this, daily attention is important. So you're going to adjust, but at least several times a week tends to be, so I'd say 3 times a week at least, daily if you need it. And then I would leave the judgment to you. All of us have areas that feel to us more natural. Oh gosh, it's English, I'm good at that, whatever. Mathematics, I'm great at that. Science, oh, that's my weakness. Languages, whatever. And the areas that feel more challenging are going to need more attention, for sure. Yeah. And you got to do them first, or we'll put it off, as we said. Yeah. All right. Other questions before we wrap up? Well, thank you. You guys are in Fort Worth, correct?
Yeah, we're in Dallas.
Oh, Dallas. Okay. Okay, Dallas, which is near. Well, I'm up here in Central New York. Thank you guys for inviting me. Again, it was fun to do. We'll be sending you the link to the workshop if you want to share that with anybody. And by all means, use the resources I shared with you. So I'm going to close now, but thanks for your attention and good luck for the rest of the year.